here with us as well. I'm just going to do a brief introduction. He is an honorary professor in Queen's University in Northern Ireland. He is the chair of the International Advisory Panel and honorary professor and advisor to the head of school in Queen's University, the School of Management. And he's a scholar at the Academy at the Harvard Medical School, very active. He gave us a lecture not long ago. What we wanted to do is put a series of several lectures throughout the years. And this second one is going to be about innovations in neurosurgery, patents, and other forms of intellectual property. And some of the work we know about his extraordinary accomplishments, all the awards, his education, spent time at Hopkins, Harvard, residency. And since then, he's been playing a very, very important role, tons of awards and honors. And he's just really, really highly regarded in the field, and it's just an amazing colleague. And he gave a beautiful lecture a few months ago, and this is the second part, and hopefully we'll have him to come back and join us in a few more parts to his lectures. It's a lot of great, amazing publications, of course. And Teo, we are here. I'm going to stop sharing this right here, and we are excited to hear you. We see you on the screen right here as well. So thank you for having us. I know you were having another meeting already this morning, so we thank you. And now you can share your screen, so we're ready for you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be back. And the most important thing that I can say is that now I'm officially on board at Mayo as well. So I look forward to sharing in everything that you're doing. Let me just find the lecture. I'm not having a little bit of difficulty because the Mayo computer has not quite figured out how to deal with me yet.
Welcome to the family then. So now you are officially in. So we all have the same issues.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. 1 second.
I see Dr.
Let's
Nami also.
see whether we can get this to work.
Thank you, Teo.
I'm so sorry. Here we go.
No problem. Take your time. I was just making a comment on the chat, Dr. Nami. So we're gonna have you come and give a lecture with you and Lina. I see that you're on the line right there. I see the chat as well. We're really, really excited, and we thank you for the amazing work that you're doing on behalf of humanity.
Do you see my slides now?
Not yet.
Not
Teo,
yet.
We don't see them. Yeah.
Give me another second.
And as you're doing that, I'll make a comment. I see Kirsten as well there from epilepsy. Kirsten, I show this slide, and I don't know if you were there, and I couldn't see anybody for some whatever reason, but thank you for showing the work that you guys are doing in epilepsy. Beautiful work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
Dr. Dagi, I have your.
Here we are.
Oh, there you go. Now we're beginning to see. There you go. We got you, Theo. Now we can see it.
Thank you so much. I apologize.
Beautiful. No problem.
Hello,
no problem.
everybody. It's good to be back. I want to talk today about intellectual property protection. Now, this is what's called a bog standard technical lecture. There's nothing philosophical. There's nothing great about this. This talks to what to do if you're interested in developing new ideas and you want to protect them. Why does that matter? It matters for two reasons, because there are two things that really become important if you're an inventor, if you're an innovator, if you want to bring things to the market, which means you want to diffuse them within the world community of neurosurgery. One is called competitiveness, and the other is called scale. And they really are like a seesaw, a balance. And the fulcrum of the balance is intellectual property protection. A good definition of competitiveness is something that makes what you do interesting to others. A good definition of competition is people who want to eat your lunch. So if competition is people who want to compete with you, people who want to eat your lunch, competitiveness is what makes your lunch worth eating. And this is the way you protect your lunch. Scale is the ability to take things and make them large enough so that the world is interested and take notice. I'm not saying that egocentrically. I'm saying that if you just have a small instrument or a small idea or a small technology, and you don't mind who else knows about it, don't worry about this. But if what you want to do is to get somebody to distribute it, or to bring it to the world, or to write about it, you need to know about intellectual property protection. And I hope that at the end of this lecture, you'll have a very much better idea than you did before about patents and other forms of intellectual property protection. Okay, intellectual property is about monopoly. Does everybody see the slide well? Slides are working well?
Yeah, we see him well.
Okay, so there is an exchange, and this goes to 1720, actually very, very early in British law and in American law. And intellectual property says, in return for telling people what you're doing, the inventor, or in the case of a piece of music, or in the case of a piece of writing, receives a monopoly on the control of an invention, a product, or writing, a piece of artware, software, or music for certain uses for a defined period of time in a particular geography or particular jurisdiction. And it matters a lot because, for example, if you have a patent in Italy, which is probably the most prolific country in the world in terms of patents, it doesn't protect you in Switzerland, and it doesn't protect you in America. So a question is not only what kind of intellectual property you have, but also where it is effective. I'm going to use the term technology as a shorthand for an invention, a product, or a software, which is really the three things I'm going to be talking about today. The inventor, the composer, or the assignee is given an exclusive period of time to fully utilize the invention or the creation. What really is the rub, though, is what you have to disclose in order to get this monopoly. There are four kinds of intellectual property protection. One is called a patent, one is a trademark, one is a copyright, and one is design registration. I'll talk about all four, but we're going to concentrate on patents today. What can be patented? First, utility inventions, functional inventions. For example, a camera can be patented. So can the lens, so can the shutter, so can the film. What can also be patented is something like the size of the camera or the components. You can also patent the design of a camera. So if you take an old-fashioned camera like a Leica, and you make a new one, which looks just like the old one, well, it turns out that certain ones you can copy because at the end of World War II, the patents on Leicas were invalidated by the powers that won the Second World War, by the Allies. Had that not been the case, you may not be able to copy the Leica. So after World War II, there was a Leica made in Japan, a Leica made in England, a Leica made in America, and Leicas made other places as well, and you could get away with it. Sometimes people have trouble with designs. For example, have any of you seen a bicycle rack that looks like nothing more than a series of stand-up columns to which a bicycle is attached, or a series of circles to which a bicycle is attached that are set in concrete? Those are just about impossible to patent protect because a very, very small difference makes you different enough to be able to claim that you have a different design. It turns out that in the agricultural world, plants cannot be patented, but plants that asexually reproduce can. So bacteria or bacterial products can often be patented. So there are 4 standards for an American patent, and pretty much American patents are the only ones that matter for us as a start, because if you can get a patent in America, you can pretty much get a patent every place else. That's not completely true, but it's pretty much true. There are 4 conditions. The invention has to qualify as patentable. It has to be completely new. It has to be useful, which means that you can actually build something that works. It has to work, and you have to be able to show that it works. And then it has to be non-obvious. So to qualify as patentable, it has to be a utility, a design, or a plant invention. To be new, it has to be private, not in use, and not disclosed publicly more than a year before the patent application filing date. Now, this turns out to be a real problem if you're an academic and trying to publish papers. Because if you want to publish a paper, if Dr. Q has invented something new and wants to publish it, he has to put in the patent application before publishing it to make sure that nobody says, well, you've already disclosed it, why are you trying to patent it? And we'll talk about how to do that. There are details on conditions under which and ways in which you can do something publicly. For example, for many years, if I would send you an email and say, guess what? I have just invented a new instrument. In Germany, and therefore in many parts of Europe, that would be considered a public disclosure. And so it was very important to write on the email, confidential, not for public use. It turns out that's probably no longer necessary, but people do it anyway, and they recommend it anyway. It's also recommended that if you have a patent attorney, you copy the patent attorney on any publication or any statement like that that you make. Why? Because then it becomes protected under disclosure to an attorney, and it's not a public disclosure. So that there are ways of doing this that you can still allow you to communicate without necessarily making something public. Now, the utility issue is really important. For example, nobody has ever been able to develop a perpetual motion machine. Everybody has wanted to. And yet, every year there are hundreds of patent applications on perpetual motion devices. In the old days, say 120 years ago, all you needed to do was to give a model of a perpetual motion machine. You can say, here's a wheel and it keeps on going around, and I'll give you a model that shows a wheel with a weight, and that's the machine. You can't do that anymore. Let's say that you want to patent the molecule. And let's say that you want to say that the molecule prevents streptococci from dividing. You need to show proof that, first of all, the molecule exists. Second, you can make it. Third, in a real world trial, maybe in a petri dish, nobody says it has to be in man, it prevents streptococci from dividing. These are called claims, and the claims have to be supported in order for a patent to be useful. Now, in some places, you also have to show that there's a beneficial utility, so it does good in some way. The question of something has a beneficial use and not immoral or deceptive is an older idea about a patent. And the problem that people ran into was the problem of firearms. You can argue morally whether a firearm is useful and beneficial or whether it's evil and not beneficial. But there are an awful lot of countries and an awful lot of companies that made a lot of money around firearms and explosives. And so for all kinds of historical reasons, that 4th bullet point has not really been looked at in any kind of a global way. The non-obviousness is very, very important. And there are all kinds of problems with obviousness. For example, let's say that you make a laser and you say that with this laser, I can point to a tumor And when I point at the tumor begins to, let's use the word, be disrupted, for lack of anything else. What I might say to you is, well, look, I've been in the OR for years. And 20 years ago, there was an OR rep, an orthopedic rep, who took a laser and pointed at an instrument and said, use this instrument. Why is the use of a laser as a pointer not obvious? Because you just told me you're pointing it at a tumor, and that's what makes the tumor disappear. Well, not so fast. You have to show that the laser works, the color works, the frequency works, and a whole bunch of other things work. And patent examiners will try to say, now, wait a minute. If you take two ideas, one, a certain frequency of laser will make a tumor disrupt. And number two, a laser can be pointed at a tumor. That's obvious. All you need to do is to put them together. And that's why simple changes to early products, like substituting material or changing sizes or changing the frequency of a laser or an ultrasound, need to be very, very carefully managed in order to avoid the problem of obvious. Now, there are two weaker forms of protection that are very important. One is the provisional patent. So, Dr. Q, you have an invention. You want to give a talk next week. It'll take you 15 minutes and a lawyer to write a provisional patent. You put that in, you file it, and now you have what's called a filing date. The filing date does not require the same kind of disclosure as a regular patent. Within a year, you have to convert it into a regular patent. But for purposes of public disclosure, you have just filed an invention with the US Patent Office, and that's enough to protect you. So we'll talk about provisional patents. It's actually a whole talk. They're very, very important. The thing to remember is they're only valid for 12 months. And even though you don't have to disclose everything, you have to disclose enough so that, let's say, 2 years later, when you have already filed your real patent, somebody can show that the provisional patent and the real patent are linked. In other words, let's say that your name happens to be Alexander Fleming, and you have a patent on penicillin, and you want to say that you have a bacterial or a fungal product that inhibits bacteria. And a year later, you say, oh, the process depends on a very particular kind of fungus. And all I said before was a fungus. The patent examiner may say it's very nice that you said that there was a fungus that could inhibit bacteria, but without identifying the fungus, you can't claim that the provisional patent actually led to the final patent. And so you don't have a protection date. And if, in fact, in the interim, between the filing of the provisional patent and the final patent, you gave a talk about it, public disclosure, you are not protected. So it turns out that the actual definition of a patent, the claims, and the dates matter a lot. There's a second form of protection, which is a utility patent. It's allowed in certain countries, not all: Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Japan, China, and Australia, and I believe Colombia, since we were talking about Colombia. But what it basically says is you need a rudimentary statement that says, here is a fountain pen. Let's see, here's a fountain pen. Please look at the point of the fountain pen. Now I'm going to take the point and I'm going to change the point so it's covered. Let's see whether I can do this. There it is. Now the point is covered. It's a different design. That keeps my fingers from being stained. That's a utility patent. It's a different patent. It's not respected everywhere, but in some places it's very useful. Patents can protect 4 things: a composition of matter, which is what something is made of. You've got a problem when you're talking about, yep.
I was going to ask maybe in the utility patent, because that's something that may be of relevance to some of our work in the operating room. It's an example with an example in the operating room. If you see an instrument and you see that you can make a modification that is not obvious, that you thought about it, would that be considered a potential utility patent to something?
It could be, but it wouldn't protect you in the US.
Gotcha.
The US doesn't recognize them,
I see.
and China violates them. So it would protect you in Japan, Italy, Spain, France, and Germany, and also Australia, which is important. But it
Gotcha.
might not help you actually in the United States. So I worry about those, and I
Gotcha.
wouldn't recommend them.
Mhm.
Okay. The next thing, though, if I may go on, is composition of matter. So composition of matter says the following. Composition of matter says two or more substances and all composite articles can be brought together to be a composition of matter. So is a drug composition of matter? Absolutely. A molecule? Absolutely. A discovery, however, is not a composition of matter. So when Taxol, which comes out of a yew tree, was first developed, people worried about whether that would be patentable. It turned out to be, because the formulation and the manufacturing changed it enough so that it could be made into a patent. But there's an overlap with things like safety glass. Safety glass is two pieces of glass with a polymer in between, and the polymer acts as a glue, which keeps the glass from shattering. And the argument is that is not composition of matter. That is a way of manufacturing something. So you can have a patent which protects things in more than one way. You protect both what is being made and how it's being made. A great example is the oncomouse, humanized, transgenic, non-human mammal whose germ cells and somatic cells contain a recombinated activated oncogene sequence. That was patentable, whereas a mouse itself was not patentable. You can patent a method or a process. How do you do something? If you take a drug and you grind it very fine, that's a method or a process. You can certainly patent a machine. A steam engine, a diesel engine is a machine. Something which has been manufactured can be patented. So a thread, a needle, think very primitively, an instrument can be thought of as an article of manufacture. The only thing that you have to do with a patent is disclose sufficient information to allow somebody skilled in the art to implement and that should be invention. Now, one of the problems in many parts of the world, particularly in Russia, is that there's a tradition of trying to get around the patent. What does that mean? That means that you disclose almost enough. You leave out a step. You leave out one of the materials that's used. You leave out a process. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're making a scalpel, something very simple, right? Handle, blade, they come together. And when you talk about the manufacture of the blade, one of the things you don't talk about is the way in which the blade is tempered to keep it sharp. So you have the handle, you have the blade, but it dulls after one cut. That patent would not be respected because you haven't disclosed a key element of what you're doing, which is tempering it. There's a strategy for getting a patent cost effectively, and it's divided into two parts, the purple part and the orange part. The purple part talks about free and low cost steps that you can do on your own. The orange part is the later part that you really need somebody good to help you with. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So do you want to patent something? There's a moral question about that. You may have something that, for example, purifies water in the third world. And you may say, I don't want to patent on that. I want to make that available to the world. Fair enough, but you won't be able to commercialize it. You may get moral satisfaction. You will not get a financial satisfaction from it. That's up to you. Also up to your institution, but we'll talk about that in a second. The most important thing that you can do by yourself is to try to understand what else in the world exists that may look like your patent. So take a fountain pen, for example. A fountain pen is considered a very noisy area because there are hundreds and thousands of things that you can write with, and some of them may actually look just like the fountain pen that you invented. A scalpel is very, very hard to patent. Of course, if you make a scalpel for cutting the cornea, and if you use a diamond tip or a jade tip rather than a steel tip, that's composition of matter and manufacture. That you can patent. That is called freedom to practice or freedom to operate, and is probably one of the most expensive parts of doing a patent application. Sooner or later, an attorney will have to be involved with that. But at the beginning, you can help by working with the patent officer and then doing that yourself. If you look at the orange side, you'll see that the second step after hiring somebody is a formal patent search that the attorney will do, but that you want to be involved with. And that's really critical. Now, the US Patent Office gives you this very, very complicated process workflow for filing a patent. What it basically means first is that I'm sorry, by the way, for the glare. What it means is you start by working out what it is that you want to patent. You want to do the claims. You then need to understand what the prior art is. Make sure that you have freedom to practice so that you're not violating anybody else's claims. Then an attorney will start looking at what it is that you want to patent in terms of the types of patents, and will do two things. One, file the patent, and the other thing is decide where outside the United States you want to file a patent. Because today, let's say, manufacturing in China, manufacturing in Japan, manufacturing in the old Soviet Union, you may want to have patents outside the United States as well to protect you from people who manufacture the same thing and try to import it to their country or export it to the United States in violation of what you do. So foreign filings are very necessary, and there's a way of doing it with something called the PCT. And the PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty. Patent Cooperation Treaty, filing for a reasonable cost within 1 year of filing a patent in the United States. There are two steps. One is the preliminary, and the second is called a national application, country or region where you're seeking a patent protection. You can file a patent 6 months after starting in the United States, or sooner if you decide that that's what you want to do. Then what you can do is get permission for a delay of 20 to 30 months before filing a separate application in each country that subscribes to the treaty. The reason that matters is that it's not inexpensive to do this. You have to get translations in the international stage, not in the initial stage, but to get something translated into Chinese or into Japanese or into other languages can be difficult. So the PCT says you start with one language, one set of initial filings to seek protection in 150 countries. Then you get a written opinion on your invention from something called an international searching authority. Then the content of your international application is made public. Now, if you already have a patent in the United States, you really don't care so much. If you haven't got an initial application in the United States, if discovery is made public, well, you may not want that. You want to make sure that you have your invention protected before the disclosure is made public. So you may want to delay. But if you don't, then you need a second international searching authority to carry out a review covering the diversity of other art or other inventions, different languages. and different technical fields. Today, the most important languages are Russian and Chinese, but there are others as well. And then the next step is to carry out an international preliminary examination that talks about how patentable what you have really is. And then you apply to each country where you want to patent. That can be expensive. The other thing that's expensive is patents once you put them in place. There's a yearly maintenance fee to make sure that a patent isn't abandoned. And usually the attorney that you work with will keep you abreast of what the maintenance fees are that you have to do. So this is a diagram of what the PCT looks like. And again, you start in the upper left-hand corner, have an international application, transmit them to the National Bureau, and then you communicate with individual countries. And as you see on the bottom, that can take 30 months or more. The American patent in medicine can also take 24 or 30 months because the patent office is overwhelmed and because the expertise that's necessary, if you're talking about biotech manufacturing, pharmacy, or things like that, can also take a very long time. Medical devices are a lot quicker. So here's a summary. Number one, what's the novelty and what's the prior art? Number two, what's the field of use? Number three, what's the proof of concept that's acceptable to the jurisdiction to show that you have utility? Next, what kind of patent? Next, you have freedom to practice, then the US patent filing, and then the PCT. So let me break for 1 second and let me give you a very important story. Everybody remember thalidomide? Thalidomide was a drug that was introduced for nausea in pregnancy. It was a disaster, right? A true unmitigated disaster. It was teratogenic as could be. The American FDA is very proud of the fact that it never allowed thalidomide to be brought into this country, but it was patented in this country. What happened to thalidomide? About 25 years later, it was reintroduced as a drug for multiple myeloma. It is one of the best drugs for any oncological indication. The patent was on the same matter, same composition of matter, but a different indication. And just as you went to the FDA with thalidomide myeloma, as opposed to thalidomide nausea and pregnancy, the patent could be reissued. And there would be small differences in manufacturing. I suppose you could do all kinds of things. But that's what made it possible to develop that as a drug that would be paid for. When penicillin was first brought to be patented in manufacturing, nobody wanted to manufacture it. And the reason that nobody wanted to manufacture it was very simple. Was actually brought to the market about 1938. But in the late 1890s, Koch, Robert Koch, of Koch's principles, had described the clearing of bacterial cultures next to a fungus. And many people felt that that would be enough to preclude a patent that included manufacturing. And penicillin was not actually manufactured in bulk until 1943 at the time of the Battle of the Bulge. We are seeing exactly the same dialogue going on right now with COVID vaccine. I'm not going to go through that, but there have to be agreements or else the country in which manufacture is going to take place has the right under some circumstances to step in with force majeure and say, we don't care about the patents, you're doing this because it's necessary for public health. Now, let's talk about something else very important. Everybody I know just about is not entirely free from being an employee of some corporation or some organization. If you're an if you're an employee or have a relationship, in general, it turns out that you probably signed something when you became an employee that said your work and your work product belongs to the organization. The simplest way to get around that is to write the organization, disclose the organization, and ask for permission to develop it yourself. Depending on what that is or who the organization is, you may get it, you may not. The University of Heidelberg in Germany is known for its generosity in allowing employees to have whatever patent material they want. Certain universities in the United States, like MIT and Stanford, are known to be very, very good at that regard. Other universities, like Harvard, are terrible. They hold on to patents and they do not let the employee develop it. Now, some things are logical. For example, if you've developed a drug or a device, you have to be very careful getting proof of principle in which you are the principal investigator for that drug or that device. It could be seen as a conflict of interest, and whether it goes well or whether it goes poorly, you might be criticized for conflict of interest in which you're using your own patients and nobody is supervising you. And therefore, even though you have some publishable information, it's not considered valid or adequate. So even though the opportunity may be there, it's worthwhile being very careful and working with the institution to make sure that you're following the rules of the institutions. I can tell you that patent litigation is very expensive. And patent litigation between an employer and an employee, excuse me, is very ugly. So it's something to be avoided at all costs. The second critical operational issue is who gets to write the patent. You get to choose the attorney. My feeling is that that's something that you should negotiate very, 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 very carefully and very aggressively. When I work with patents, I want the smartest attorney that I can find, somebody who actually has domain expertise to write the patent. If I'm writing a patent on an electrode for deep brain stimulation, I want somebody who knows neurophysiology, who knows biomaterials, who knows electrode fouling, who knows connections, and who knows the process, the procedure of putting in the electrode. If I'm talking about a drug, I want somebody who understands manufacture of drug, toxicities, PKs, and things like that. It's not just writing according to the law, because if you understand it, you can write a better patent. Then you want to know who will file the patent, which is different than who writes it. The filing of the patent can be seen as a very technical kinds of things. You can get somebody who's a legal extender who will do nothing more than file the patent. But you've got to be careful, because who pays for it and when? What happens when you get an answer from the patent office? What happens if you need to contest a decision? What happens if additional art is found? That's very, very important stuff, and you'd like to be involved with it. So how do you choose a patent counsel? Like a neurosurgeon. Don't choose a cheap neurosurgeon. Choose the best neurosurgeon for the purpose that you can find. Same thing with a patent counsel. It's your work. You've put your life into it. Don't stint on having a very, very good patent counsel. First rule, don't do it yourself. Even if you can, and many people can, don't do it by yourself. Find an expert with advanced degrees. Make sure the patent counsel and you understand the deadlines. Make sure you have adequate proof of concept in the jurisdiction. So Canada, the US, and England are different. The cost of a freedom to practice opinion is very high, but necessary. And there are ways of doing it today using artificial intelligence that really works. Most American investors, venture capitalists, will not consider the PCT a sufficient freedom to practice opinion, even though it involves two freedom to practice opinions. Most American investors will not recognize that. One thing to keep in mind is that where you file the patent is a business decision and not a legal one. It has nothing to do with the law. It has to do with where you're going to manufacture, sell, distribute, or do research. And you want to make sure that everybody with whom you collaborate is on board with all the patent work that you do. So a patent does not protect a business. It does not make a business. It protects a niche. If you have something which is protectable, if you have something that is competitive, one of the ways in which you can protect it is with a patent. Remember that a patent discloses. If you don't want to disclose, that's fine. There are other ways to protect it. We'll talk about that in a second. Patent can be sold, but not for very much, unless it's a very significant process. So the Haber process for the production of ammonia, which was a substitute for Chilean saltpeter for the Axis forces in World War I, sold for a huge amount of money because there was no other way to make explosive. Ordinary patents don't sell for that much. When you look at what patent trolls try to buy a patent for, a patent troll is somebody who will say, oh, by the way, Dr. Q, your patent happens to be violating mine. So I'll tell you what, I'll do you a favor and I'll take it off their hands. The number that they usually try to get to is $100,000 to $250,000. So usually the amount of money that goes into the development of the patent is not recouped. So one patent alone is not worth all that much. But patents can either block something, it can block me from doing something that competes with you, or it can facilitate. It can allow me to sell or manufacture or design something so that nobody else can compete with me for 20 years. A good patent estate, combination of patents, does both. A great patent estate increases the value of a business or an enterprise and is worth a lot of money. A small patent estate is not. So Moderna's patents are worth a tremendous amount for COVID. Pfizer has a different patent estate, also worth an awful lot. Both of those have been proven to work and have some approval for emergency use. That's what gives them the value, not the patents alone. So let's recap. A patent works for 20 years from the date of filing. You have to disclose a huge amount. It protects an invention, and the disclosure is sufficient to enable somebody else schooled in the art to replicate it. It has to be reduced to practice. What you patent has to be patentable, and an innovation must be invented and not discovered. One of the huge controversies had to do with the biotechnology of recombinant organisms. Was that a discovery or was that an invention? Eventually it became an invention, but it was not clear at the beginning whether it was a discovery or whether it was an invention because it existed in nature. And existing in nature is considered a discovery and not an invention. A copyright has to do with two things, writings, but also software. So this is really a different discussion. It's a discussion about algorithms and AI in medicine and neurosurgery and how you actually protect things like that. The disclosure is about expression. It's not just an idea. I have invented a spreadsheet. That doesn't get you anywhere. Once you have something that I can put in a box and I can sell, or I can put in a computer and use, that I can copyright, but not the idea. It must be reduced to a fixed and tangible state. So music and writing and poetry and software that are original can all be copied and can all be copyrighted. The problem with software, it's a much longer discussion, is how many lines of code have to be different before you say to me, this is different enough that I'm allowed to copyright it. And there's controversy on this. Now, a trademark or service mark is your brand. So if you think of the old idea of how you mark cattle, you know that it belongs to you for the brand. And if you have a brand, you can register the brand and it protects you. So the name Mayo Clinic is trademarked. The diagram, which is Mayo Clinic, is trademarked. You have Mayo Clinic Neurosurgery, Jacksonville. You can trademark that. It doesn't have to be registered, but it's very, very useful. And it can protect a word, a name, a symbol, anything that's used to identify things. So if you have two drugs, one is called miraculum and the other is called miracula, you can argue that the second one is a violation of the trademark if the first one has been trademarked because it's easily confused. We talked about provisional patent applications, but the important thing about the provisional patent application, and you can see in the notes in the right-hand column that there are certain conditions and ideas that you have to respect, is that it protects you for a year. And during that year, you can get more proof of concept, you can raise money, you can show ways in which it's still more different than other things. In other words, you can strengthen your patent. You can also decide that you don't want to patent it. It's too valuable. You don't want to disclose it. All you want to do is to have a trade secret. Because if the provisional patent application is abandoned, it's never published. If it is published, it's up to you whether you want to refer to the provisional patent application in the final patent publication. If you don't, nobody will know what's in it, but you'll still have to wait to get the patent. If you do, people will look at the provisional patent application and will know what you're disclosing. Again, the disadvantage of the European patent system, the PCT, is that the disclosures are published relatively soon. So we're very close to the end right now. People always ask, how much does it cost? And this is for 2021 pretty much correct. A simple patent can be had for $4,000 to $5,000. A complicated one, I think it's actually between 12 and 18,000. But attorneys will work with you. They're not allowed to really take equity. They're not allowed to take shares in a company under most circumstances, and most universities won't do that. But most universities will say, if we take over the patent, we'll pay for it. If we don't, you can have it back. And that's one way to get it back, to say you'll pay for the patent. So there's certain things we haven't talked about today. Managing IP if you're a student, a resident, a faculty member, an employee. That's a separate discussion, happy to talk about it. Software and algorithm protection, patent litigation and patent trolling. So let's say that Canon has made a camera. Sony, who's famous for doing this, 20 years ago, bought a patent. The patent is still valid. They then threatened Canon with using their patent and suing Canon for violating the canon. As a result, Canon will make some concessions soon. And this happens, this kind of thing happens all the time. Patent litigation lawsuits can cost millions of dollars and are a way of causing a small company to collapse. How do you use patents in a startup? You need somebody who knows patents if you're building a startup and you have a board of directors. What is it worth in a corporation? What is public disclosure? If I talk to you at the Society of Neurological Surgeons, that's not public, is it? Well, kind of, even though it's a very, very small group. What about the grand rounds? A little bit questionable. Now that we're broadcasting, it probably is a public disclosure. If we hadn't been broadcasting, no. What about at M&M rounds? No, that's not a public disclosure because that's protected. What's the career balance between publication and unprotected disclosure? The one school that has thought about this very carefully is Johns Hopkins. And Hopkins has an actual map of what a patent is worth relative to promotion and publication. What do you do with patent extensions and what is a proof of concept? So these are areas that I've left out today, but I'm happy to come back to if you'd like to. So, conclusions. IP strategy is critical. It's a specialized skill. Don't do it at home. Make sure you understand what you own and what you don't. Find the best patent attorney you can, and it's not necessarily in the firm of your corporate attorney if you have a corporate attorney. And it's not necessarily the attorney whom the hospital or the institution will want. Freedom to practice You'll have to deal with it at some point, especially if you want to bring in outside money. It's often neglected. Critically, a patent is not confirmation of scientific value. Just because you have a patent doesn't mean, or just because you see a patent, doesn't mean that the science underneath it is valid. And the decision of where and when to patent is strategic and requires very serious thought. So with your permission, let me stop there. And if we have time, let me open to questions. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you find this useful.
Theo, that was an amazing talk. You can see in the chat we have tons of comments and discussions, and we recorded a lecture, and you saw all these topics not discussed that will be the source of future lectures. We prepared this series of lectures, with Theo, and we're so blessed to have you. I do have Dr. Hakim Rodolfo. I don't know if you're available to make some comments. Obviously, you and your family, they have done amazing work and have terrific experience on patents, especially for hydrocephalus. Rodolfo, are you able to make any comments in your sort of pearls and what you have gone through over the history of your own work?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well,
Very well.
Rodolfo. Thank you.
Oh, this is interesting. Technology is amazing. So, yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Well, yes, it was a wonderful talk. Interesting because every time I hear this is the most complete talk, and even though I belong to a family that has had patents throughout pretty much since my day of birth, there's many things that I don't know, and you're brought up to a world where you're scared because there's so many things and so many rules that change all the time, and there's so much competition. So I learned through my dad and growing up since I was 3 years old, helping him build the first shunt at home. I used to make the springs for the valve, and he would explain to me in a very simple, easy to understand way how things worked. And then I saw how the patent world, I got involved a little bit in what the patent world was about, because it was back in the 60s, early 70s, where, a lot of ideas came out of my dad, and the first shunt, the first Hakim valve was patented in 1966. And so why was it patented? If they already had Holter valves and a few other different valves. So no, the spring was what made this valve different. And the curve to keep the CSF pressure constant at different flows is what made this valve special at that time. And the one thing that I wanted to ask Dr. Forcht was, when does a patent expire? I understood back then there was like 17 or 18 years, but I don't know how things are nowadays. That is one question I would like to ask, because when that valve expired, the patent, so we had the idea of the programmable valve, and when that was brought up to the FDA, and so we already have valves. What is so special about this valve? Why? Well, you can change pressures. So why do you want to change the pressure? And so it was difficult to explain that concept to a group of people that have their minds, it's a new topic, totally different. Why do you want a new valve? And the ones that and then we had other people in the world producing valves, because some patents expire. And for example, the horizontal vertical became later what do you call it? One of the, not a siphon, but gravitational devices. So if you go back in the early 60s, that idea already existed. And so, but you cannot protect it anymore because it's an old patent. And nowadays, when you start working in a different valve, like a new improved valve, it is each time more difficult, because what are you bringing new, and why do you want to patent it? And then why do you want a valve if valves get infected, and so on and so forth? It's pretty much it's a hard journey, I would say, but it's worthwhile. If you like what you do, it's the only way. And also ideas with the instruments, as Dr. Quinones mentioned, it is fascinating. Like when you're in the operating room and you have an idea, and then you want to change this, like a different catheter, and is that patentable or not? And that's where things become complicated. Who do you ask? And whether it's worthwhile to invest money to create something that might be or might not be useful, maybe only for me, but no one really cares. Those are things that you have to keep in mind.
Beautiful comment, Rodolfo, Dr. Hakim. That's amazing. So, Dagi, Dr. Dagi, you can see how this situation, there's a lot of tremendous interest. I was just thinking about just listening to your talking about this and listening to also Rodolfo about this, is the fact that when you are in the operating room, I mean, sometimes you hold an instrument and you give it to your resident, and everybody's holding, you realize this can actually be done better, ergonomically better, if you just twist this, twist that, and stuff like that. So you begin to come up with ways of doing things better. But how do you protect those ideas? Is there a way to protect them? I hope that we can get into some of this conversation, Teo, in the future,
Yes.
as you did today.
May I
Thank
just tell Dr. Hakim one thing?
Please, please.
I met your father in 1973 or 1974 in the operating room at the Mass General.
Wow.
And I was doing a shunt. And he very kindly said to me, there's a better way of doing it, and showed me how to do it. And then we sat in the surgeon's room, in the surgeon's lounge, and we talked about shunts and about inventions and about ideas. And he was probably more inspiring than just about anybody else to me in terms of asking the question, how do you develop stuff? And how do you bring it to the patient? How do you go from bench to bedside, and what do you need to do it? And he really convinced me, didn't take much, I must say, but he really convinced me that if what you want to do is to make things better, you have to create them. Because it's very easy to just sit on what exists, but find something better. And that's important. So thank you. I was aware of the work that you had done with him. And I don't think that many people necessarily are. But, I admire you and your father for everything that you were able to do. And I think that the family serves as a great example of a way to benefit humanity by making, I think it's a big change, but you can argue it's at least a small change in the way certain diseases were managed. I think it's much more than that in your case, but it's really important. I mean, this is why I got interested in innovation and invention. So thank you very much. And I'd like to acknowledge it. By the way, the answer to the question is 20 years now for a patent.
20.
Yeah.
17.
Amazing. And Rodolfo, we do have an invitation, thanks to Gabriel, who felt that it was important to have you and your family come up and give a lecture about the history of all these things, because I think that a combination between the history of your family and what you guys have done to help people with hydrocephalus, which is, as we now know, it used to be a devastating disease. It's still tough, but it's now something that we can do as surgeons. And it's a tremendous testament of what innovation and what, thinking about the patient can actually do for humanity. So I do agree with Teo. So hopefully we'll have some of those lectures. So very excited. I want to be respectful of people's time. I have another meeting for which I'm late already many minutes, but this is so exciting. Teo, we're looking forward. We can have a whole series if it's okay with you. And Rodolfo, please, let's have your team from Colombia, from everywhere around the world, Gabriel, your people, to join us. And you'll have a series of talks throughout the year, hopefully for many years to come. All those topics that Teo just mentioned is an hour talk each one, and hopefully we'll have them throughout the year. Sounds good?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
A great week.
Gracias.
Bye-bye. Gracias, Gabriel.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.